John McCartney, you're Director of Research at Savills in Dublin, the estate agents. You make an estimate as to the likely age of the first-time buyer by the end of this decade. What is it, please?
Well, certainly first-time buyers are getting older. We believe that the average is now sort of mid-30s, and it remains to be seen what happens. But certainly our view is that the central bank mortgage lending rules are diverting people into the rented sector because they can't afford to get a mortgage because they haven't got enough money saved to get a deposit. And they're going to be in the rented sector, in my opinion, for a considerable time in many cases, because rents have been pushed up so much by everybody piling in that
they don't have enough money to save.
How can you
to put down a deposit?
Yeah.
So there is a headline suggesting that the average first-time buyer, the age of that person, could be 40 by the end of the decade.
I suppose it's possible, yeah. I mean, we didn't originate that figure, but that doesn't seem entirely implausible. Of course, you have to remember, Matt, that with the booming economy, what we're seeing is, returning migrants coming back to the country, and technically they're first-time buyers, even though they may have been homeowners in the UK or somewhere else.
But they might be bringing cash back with them as well, giving them an advantage over the people who stayed here in Ireland.
Oh, very much, Matt. We did a bit of analysis last year, and what we found was that if you had gone to London in 2008 and you'd sold the average house in Dublin in 2008, gone to London, bought the average house in London, waited until June 2015, sold the average London house, converted your sterling back to euro, you would have bought the average Dublin house back in Dublin, and you would have had a windfall gain of €511,000. A combination.
That much?
That much. A combination of three things: the exchange rate dividend, because the euro's weakened against sterling, the boom in London property prices, and the fact that Dublin prices had fallen.
OK, I'm sure few enough people managed to pull that particular trick off, but at present you reckon that nearly half of all residential sales at present are being done by cash buyers. Who has the cash to buy without having to get a mortgage?
Well, absolutely. This has been a trend actually for 3 or 4 years now. A huge proportion of sales were entirely transacted with cash, but what we're seeing is a change in the profile of those cash buyers. Traditionally, well, when I say traditionally, I mean over the last 3 or 4 years, it has been primarily investors and people trading down, because if you're trading down, you're selling a bigger house, you're buying a smaller apartment or whatever, and you're unlocking the equity, but you're buying the smaller property with cash. That has been the normal profile of the cash buyer. What we're now seeing, however, is in Q4 of last year, first-time buyers accounted for 15% of all cash buyers. 4 years ago, that was nil. So,
and where are they getting the money? They're getting it off their parents?
We believe in most cases that is the case, and we think that really the psychology has fundamentally changed. 18 months ago, 2 years ago, parents were reluctant to assist their adult children to buy property, A, because I think they were worried about their own personal finances, but B, they perceived that the market hadn't reached rock bottom and they were worried that their kids would be throwing their money into a hole.
Sarah McCabe, business reporter with the Sunday Independent. Could it be, though, that perhaps we're going to have a new generation of people in their 20s and 30s who are looking at all of the ruin that has been caused by investment in property in the past, who will say, you know what, let's just rent. Let's not bother with buying.
Absolutely, yeah. I think renting is a far more proposition today. And one of the biggest reasons for that, I think, is that the nature of work has changed. So people, particularly young people, change jobs much more regularly now. And you could be moving out of the county or out of the country, on an 18-month cycle, say, and being in one fixed place just doesn't make sense anymore. But at the same time, everybody wants a stable place to live that they can afford. So that means a stable, liquid rental market, and that's something we don't have either.
And of course then I suppose there is a psychological thing when people start having children, that they want a place almost to set down roots for schools and things, a place they can call their own.
Absolutely. I think that's probably the turning point. And maybe the fact that we're buying our first homes older is contributing to the fact that we're also having our first children later than the EU average, and we're having more children in our 40s than the EU average for the first time.
But isn't there also going to be a difficulty, though, that if people leave buying their first home until later, maybe they have saved a bit of money they require, or they're lucky enough to have money coming from their parents, but it will impact on the length of mortgage that a bank is willing to actually give them?
That's very true as well. I mean, obviously, the longer term you can get, the lower you're going to have to pay
in monthly installments. Although you'll end up paying more in the long run, the longer the term of the mortgage.
Sure, yes. But no, that's absolutely a valid point.
Okay, so where do you see this going, particularly with the central bank having the tight mortgage lending rules in place? Or is it possible that a new government might ask the central bank to loosen those rules a bit?
They certainly could. I understand the central bank is going to review them at the end of the year, and there already is a quarterly review underway. So they are being watched, and they do have the ability to reverse them. But I think what we need, I mean, you have to remember as well that these mortgage lending rules did have the effect of stopping the spiralling house price rises in Dublin. So in a way, they did help first-time buyers and young people who couldn't afford in Dublin. But
the issue still, John McCartney, is that rents are going up and there's a shortage of supply, and not just in Dublin, but in other major cities as well in particular.
Yes, well, I would take a view that the central bank rules haven't really resolved house price inflation. All they have done is displaced it. So we have people moving from Dublin out to the commuter belt because they can't afford to buy in Dublin with the new lending rules. That's driving faster house price growth in counties like Meath, Wicklow, Kildare. We've seen very rapid house price growth there. Likewise, we've also seen people who can't afford to buy houses in Dublin renting pro temp while they try and accumulate a deposit, and of course that's driving rental growth. So I think it's more nuanced than a simple...
Yeah, because some listeners are saying that the problem at the moment is there's very few properties available to rent. They're more expensive than the mortgage payments on the same property.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that there's only 2 weeks supply, I think was the figure that Daft put out this morning in the Dublin market, and that's because I think largely the central bank rules mean that people who heretofore would have been buying their own properties can't do it, and they're piling into the rented sector. And I think one of the things that the central bank is going to review the rules, but there's no rush, I would say, in doing that, because I think it's only with time we'll see the full effect of these.
Okay, we've got to leave it there. John McCartney from Savills and Sarah McCabe from the Sunday Independent, thank you for joining us.